Ruby had never told anyone this story, mostly because she knew no one would believe it. Even now, years later, the memory still followed her, especially whenever she heard the sound of waves at night. What was meant to be a simple vacation in Lagos, Nigeria, became something she could never escape. Before Lagos, before the beach, and before the cries, Ruby was simply a nurse, a South African nurse who worked at Getwell Hospital. She was a trained midwife, and for years that role had consumed her entire life. Her days blended into nights as she moved from one shift to another, with barely any rest in between. Her routine never changed. Long hours on her feet, back-to-back labor cases, mothers screaming through pain, newborns crying the moment they entered the world, doctors shouting orders, demanding more speed, more focus, more strength. There was always pressure, always urgency, and never enough appreciation. For 4 straight years, Ruby had not taken a real break. No vacation, no time off to breathe. Her body was constantly exhausted, but her mind suffered even more. She watched countless women experience the joy of motherhood while she stood nearby, holding tools instead of dreams. Each celebration reminded her of how empty she felt inside. There was no space for her own life, no time to reflect, to heal, or to ask herself what she truly wanted. She returned home every day, drained, barely able to eat or sleep before the next shift began. Nurses like her were rarely praised. When things went right, the credit went elsewhere. When something went wrong, the blame often landed on her shoulders. Slowly, the job she once loved began to feel like a burden. Guilt followed her everywhere, but resentment followed too. Deep inside, a painful truth kept repeating itself in her mind. She was tired of saving babies that were not hers, tired of helping families she would never see again, tired of giving everything she had, only to feel like there was nothing left of her at all. The night everything broke was one of the worst she had ever worked. The maternity ward was full, and every bed was occupied. 3 women were in active labor at the same time, each screaming in pain, each needing attention. Machines beeped nonstop, nurses rushed back and forth. The air felt heavy and tense. One mother screamed her name over and over, begging for help. As Ruby tried to calm her, a doctor stormed in, angry and impatient. Without listening, he blamed her for the delay, raising his voice in front of everyone. She stood there, tired, embarrassed, and helpless. She had done nothing wrong, yet she was treated like she had failed. Something inside her cracked. She walked away, locked herself inside the hospital bathroom, and leaned against the cold wall. Her hands shook as tears streamed down her face. She covered her mouth to stop herself from sobbing, but the sound still escaped. In a low whisper, barely louder than her breath, she said the words she had been holding back for years. "I am done." That night, after her shift ended, she made a decision she never thought she would make. She applied for leave without overthinking it. She didn't plan properly. She didn't even care where she was going. She simply picked a place far from hospitals, babies, and responsibility. Lagos, Nigeria. A few days later, as she boarded the plane, guilt sat heavy in her chest, but underneath it was something else relief. For the first time in years, she felt like she could breathe. The moment she stepped out of the airport in Lagos, the heat wrapped around her like a living thing. The city was loud, busy, and full of movement. Cars honked, People laughed. Music played from everywhere. Life felt raw and real, nothing like the quiet hospital halls she had left behind. She checked into a small beach house hotel, not far from the ocean. That first evening, she sat on the bed and listened to the sound of the waves rolling in and out. It was calm, steady, and soothing. She ordered a cold drink, sank into the soft sheets, and slept deeply, without alarms or emergency calls. Days passed, and she began to feel like herself again. She went out at night, dressed up, and allowed herself to have fun. She went clubbing, danced to loud music, and laughed in a way she hadn't in years. She accepted dates from young, handsome Nigerian men who made her feel seen and desired. For once, no one needed her to save them. She felt alive, free, light. With every passing day, she told herself the same thing. She would never go back to being a midwife, that life was over. She had given enough. This new version of herself wanted peace, pleasure, and rest. The first 2 nights at the beach were perfect. Calm, quiet, no nightmares, no screams, just the ocean, the breeze, and a silence that felt like healing. She truly believed she had finally escaped the life she left behind. The first time she heard it, she was half asleep. It was late at night, long after the beach had gone quiet. A soft crying sound drifted through her open window. She turned in bed and frowned. Lagos was lively, even at night. She assumed it was a drunk woman arguing nearby or someone crying after a fight. The sound faded, and she forced herself back to sleep. The next night, it came again. This time, it was louder, closer. The sound carried pain, the kind that made her chest tighten. She sat up in bed, listening. Maybe it was the waves crashing strangely, she told herself. The ocean could make all kinds of noises. Still, something about it felt wrong. As the nights passed, the crying returned again and again. Each time, it grew worse, louder, more desperate. It wasn't just sadness, it was suffering. The kind of sound that came from deep inside someone who was in serious pain. Sleep became impossible. She tossed and turned, her heart racing, her mind restless. Anxiety crept in slowly. She tried to distract herself during the day, but at night, the sound pulled her back to a life she thought she had escaped. Her body began to react before her mind did. Her hands tightened. Her breathing changed. The instincts she had buried as a midwife started waking up. By the 4th night, she couldn't take it anymore. She got out of bed, walked to the window, and looked toward the dark beach. Whatever was crying out, there wasn't going away. She grabbed a light cover and made a decision. She would go outside and see for herself. The beach was quiet as she stepped onto the sand. The moon hung low in the sky, its pale light reflecting across the water. The ocean looked calm, almost peaceful, as if nothing was wrong. For a moment, she wondered if she had imagined everything. Then she saw movement. Something shifted near the shallow part of the sea. The water rippled in an unnatural way. She took a cautious step closer, her heart pounding. Another cry pierced the silence, sharp and full of pain. It was real. As her eyes adjusted, she froze. Half in the water, half tangled near the shore, was a mermaid. Her long tail was trapped in barbed wires, twisted tightly around her scales. Blood stained the water around her, dark against the moonlight. Her face was pale, strained, and wet with tears. Her hands clutched her swollen belly, and it was then that the nurse understood the truth. The mermaid was pregnant. Another cry escaped her lips, and her body shook as a contraction hit. The sound sent a chill through the nurse's spine. Fear rushed in all at once. Her mind screamed that this was impossible. She stood frozen, unable to move, unable to breathe properly. The mermaid looked at her and begged in a broken, trembling voice. She didn't understand the words, but she understood the pain. She had seen it countless times before. The fear, the struggle, the desperate fight to bring life into the world. Her heart raced as reality crashed down on her. This was childbirth. The same pain she had witnessed in hospital rooms. The same suffering she had sworn she was tired of. Only now it was happening in the sea, in front of something that should not exist. Confusion filled her mind as fear and duty collided, and she didn't know which feeling would win. The shock turned quickly into anger. Years of exhaustion, frustration, and buried resentment rushed to the surface all at once. She took a step back and screamed, the sound tearing out of her throat. She wasn't screaming at the mermaid alone. She was screaming at her life. She shouted that she was done, that she didn't come all the way to Lagos to save anyone, that she was tired of responsibility, tired of pain, tired of always being the strong one. She wanted peace, not another life depending on her hands. Her voice cracked as she looked at the mermaid. In a shaking tone, she said she was sorry, truly sorry. But she couldn't help. She wouldn't. Not again. The mermaid cried louder, reaching out to her, begging with desperate eyes. Another contraction hit, and her scream echoed across the water. The sound pierced the nurse's heart, but fear pushed her forward. She turned and ran. Back in her room, the cries followed her. They echoed in her head, growing louder with every passing minute. No matter how tightly she closed her eyes or covered her ears, she could still hear them. Sleep never came. She lay awake all night, staring at the ceiling, her chest heavy with guilt, knowing deep down that she had walked away from something she could never truly escape. Just before morning, she sat up in bed. The sky outside was slowly changing color, and the cries had grown weak, almost broken. She knew then that time was running out. Her heart pounded as she swung her legs off the bed. Fear rushed back in, but it no longer controlled her. Something stronger pushed her forward. She grabbed a few clean towels from the room and her small first aid box. Her hands trembled as she walked back toward the beach. The sand felt cold beneath her feet, and the sea looked darker than before. When she reached the shore, her chest tightened. The mermaid was still there. She looked weak, her body barely moving. The water around her was stained, and her breathing was shallow. Panic rose, but training took over. The nurse knelt beside her and spoke in a calm, steady voice, the same voice she had used with countless women before. She gently freed what she could of the tangled wires and positioned her carefully. Her hands moved with purpose, soft but sure. She guided her through each contraction, encouraging her to breathe, to push. The pain was intense, but the nurse stayed focused. The cries slowly changed, turning into effort instead of fear. Then, in a final moment of silence, a small cry broke through. The baby was born alive. The sea seemed to respond instantly. The waves softened, the wind slowed, and the water grew calm, as if the ocean itself was holding its breath. The mermaid looked at Ruby with eyes full of gratitude. Weakly, she reached out and held the nurse's hands. The moment their skin touched, a warm energy flowed through her arms and into her chest. It wasn't painful. It felt gentle, like light filling an empty space. The nurse felt something shift inside her. Her body felt strong again. Her mind felt clear. The exhaustion she had carried for years lifted, as if it had been washed away by the sea. She breathed deeply, feeling renewed in a way she had never felt before. The mermaid whispered words she could not fully understand, but the meaning was clear. "Thank you." Slowly, the mermaid cradled her baby and slipped back into the water. The sea opened around her, and within moments, she was gone. No splash, no trace, just calm water and the sound of gentle waves. The nurse's legs gave way. She sank onto the sand, her strength finally releasing. As the sun began to rise, she lay there and closed her eyes. For the first time in years, she slept peacefully, without fear, without dreams, and without the weight of the world on her shoulders. When she eventually returned to nursing, everything felt different. She stepped back into the hospital with a calm she had never known before. Emergencies no longer shook her. Where others panicked, she stayed steady. Her hands were strong, her instincts were sharp. Complicated deliveries that once filled rooms with fear became moments of quiet focus. Mothers others had given up on survived. Babies who should not have made it cried loudly in her arms. Again and again, she succeeded where failure was expected. People began to notice. Doctors trusted her judgment without question. Nurses whispered her name with respect. Families spoke of her like a miracle. Word spread quickly beyond the hospital walls. She never fails, they said. If she is there, everything will be fine. She worked tirelessly, but this time it did not drain her. The work filled her instead. Each life saved felt meaningful. Each cry of a newborn sounded like hope rather than noise. She finally understood that her gift was not a punishment, it was a calling she had been running from. Her work did not go unnoticed. Awards followed, first locally, then internationally. She was recognized as one of the best nurses in the world. Hospitals invited her to train others. Conferences asked her to speak. Her story inspired thousands. She received a life-changing reward, one that brought comfort, security, and choices she had never had before. Yet none of it mattered as much as what she felt inside. Fulfillment, purpose, peace. She finally understood the truth she had been avoiding for years. Helping others had never been a curse. It was the very thing that gave her life meaning. She never told anyone the real reason she changed. To the world, she was simply a gifted nurse with an incredible instinct. The truth stayed locked inside her, shared only through anonymous words written late at night. Sometimes, when she stands near the ocean, she still hears it. Not cries anymore, but a soft sound, like a whisper carried by the waves. She feels watched over, protected, as if the sea remembers her kindness. She knows what she saw was real. She knows what she did mattered. And she knows some stories are not meant to be believed, only lived. She went to Lagos to escape childbirth. But childbirth found her in the sea.